Mode.
Hello, and welcome to today's webcast on succeeding with measurement in a large software development organization. Today's webcast will be presented by Ian Spence, and Ian had assistance with the content in this presentation from Inga Diepenhorst and Hans Kuipers at KPN, who are the case study customer in this webcast. And unfortunately, Hans was to join us today, but unfortunately, he had a travel appointment. And so I wanted to mention that Inga Diepenhorst was on this morning's call answering questions. So if somebody wants to listen to those questions after the webcast, they're able to view the webcast recording tomorrow, and I'll provide that to you. And you're able to fast forward to those questions that were answered from Inga at KPN. So as we begin, a couple of housekeeping notes to mention. Everyone is on mute mode, just for sound quality issues. And if you have questions, if you've attended our webcast before, you know the procedure. But if not, we take questions via the question function in the control panel in GoToMeeting. So you submit that any time during the webcast, and we'll answer those at the end of the webcast. So as I mentioned, Ian Spence will be presenting. Ian specializes in the agile application of the unified process. He is a certified rep practitioner, scrum master, and an experienced coach, having worked on hundreds of projects to introduce agile and iterative techniques. Ivar Jacobson International is a global services company helping software organizations transform and improve the way in which they develop software solutions, as well as guide organizations in meeting the needs and expectations of the business. The ultimate goal for every development organization is to produce good software quickly and at low cost. At IJI, our focus and expertise is to resolve issues in the areas of bridging the gap between business and IT, requirements definition and ensuring that the solution meets the needs of the business, helping organizations with the inability to meet project budget or deadlines, and getting teams to work effectively. On that note, I'm going to hand it over to Ian, who's going to go through today's presentation. And Ian, I'm just giving you control right now. There you go.
Okay. Well, thank you, Leanne, and thank you all for joining us. The presentation we have here is a customer success story from a large software organisation, and that organisation is KPN, who are the leading Dutch telecoms company. Their revenue is counted in billions of euros, 13.5. They have over 33,000 full-time employees, and they are the major Dutch telecoms company. They have about 50% of the mobile customers, over 50% of the fixed lines, and are big players in the broadband, internet, tele, and all those sorts of things. And as you can see from the slide, they have a number of subsidiaries and spin-offs. Telfort is their mobile telephony company. G-Tronics provide infrastructure and other services in the IT arena. So they are a significant player, and their organisation internally is structured in quite an unusual way. So the business is split into domains, business market, consumer market, wholesale operations, and other domains. And one of the key characteristics of them as a software development organization is they actually outsource all their development. So you can see on the bottom of the slide there, they have 10 major suppliers and many smaller suppliers. And what ITNL does, which stands for IT Netherlands, this is the IT department that sits between the business and the suppliers to ensure that the IT investment is in line with their technology strategy, controls the architecture, and makes sure that they get the best value for money out of the suppliers. Within ITNL, just within innovation, ignoring any maintenance and other work, just the innovation projects, there are 14 programs, there are hundreds of projects, well over 100, I think they might have done 300 or more projects, and they have over 300 full-time employees just working on the innovation projects. And that's not including any of the development resources from the suppliers. So as an IT department, if you count all the people working from the suppliers, you're getting into thousands of people. This is a major IT development organization, and IT is obviously a major part of their value proposition and the ability to deliver modern telephone services. KPN are a telephone operator as opposed to an equipment supplier or network supplier. So KPN, ITNL, has been the customer we've been working with, and what we'd like to do is talk about how we've helped them progress their measurement. Like a lot of organisations, they've been trying to introduce key performance indicators. They've been trying to change and improve the way they work, and that's something that I've had the pleasure of being involved with them in, and where they have made use of the Better, Faster, Cheaper, Happier framework. But before we talk about that, we need to talk about where they were and what was going on when we first got involved, what triggered the involvement and the need to change their whole approach to measurement. We'll look at how we changed the focus onto the organisational goals, got set up, and how we've actually managed to totally transform the way measurement is used and the way the people who do measurement are appreciated within the organisation. I think it's an exciting story, and hopefully you'll enjoy going through that with us today. So what was the situation like at the beginning? Well, as with any sort of large organisation, there were several change programs underway. I first got involved 18 months or so ago, and at the time there was a number of change programs all aimed at improving ITNL's performance. Many of these change programs had existed in some form sort of almost every year. But ones that were going on, there was one called iTeamworks, Together Towards Improved IT, which is mainly about team working, and actually had the goal of introducing a set of key performance indicators. IGI's initial involvement was with the SDCC, the Software Development Competency Centre, which is part of the QA department, where they'd been charged with actually rolling out a new process to improve things, and the process that they selected was the Essential Unified process, and their partner for the rollout and the mentoring was IGI. And that's where we got involved, and the scope of that change was all the programs, all the teams, all of the people involved in software development within ITNL. So all of these programs are going, lots of programs going on at the same time, and there were some KPIs in place, but they weren't related to the change, and they weren't driving the change. What had happened is what happens in a lot of large organisations. They'd been told things they should measure, and they were investing quite a lot of money, thinking about in trying to create these measurements and create a set of KPIs in a dashboard. But they weren't driving the change. This was causing a number of concerns and issues. There was a metrics desk set up, which had about 4 people working on it, but it was really struggling to get any traction. It was seen as overhead. The measurement work was very much being done in isolation because the measures were not related to the objectives. People weren't that interested in them. There was a lot of good work being done by the metrics desk, but really it was falling on deaf ears. There was a production of a comprehensive monthly status report. No one was using it. No one was reading it. No one was asking or acting on the measures. And people weren't even believing the measures, so a lot of the teams were in denial about the true quality and effectiveness of their work. And this was a big problem for the change programs, particularly the process rollout, in that it was going to be impossible to prove that the new way of working was any better than the old way. And that's always a hurdle when we embark on organisational change. How do we actually keep the momentum and get through to the second and third year where you really read the upside if you've not got these comparisons or any kind of baselines in place? So this was when they asked us to get involved, because it appeared to be doing just measurement for measurement's sake. there was a lot of data being collected, but the focus had tended to be, rather than what do we need, how can we answer the question, how can we prove we've met our objectives and goals, but they were just measuring what was easy to measure. There was no real analysis being applied. Information, as I said, very dense monthly report, but it wasn't intuitive. People within ITNL, the IT specialists, didn't understand the measures, let alone the business. And you see this with a lot of measurement frameworks. One of the things I'd like to communicate, I'm not going to tell you of any particular set of measures that you ought to measure, because there is no set. It's got to relate to your goals and your objectives. And what happens is a lot of times people are sold on the idea of specific measures, but nobody understands them. I mean, I've been in the IT business too long now, 25 years or more, and I've had an interest in process improvement and measures for most of that time. And often I see these dashboards and I don't understand them. And that may be a little arrogant, but if someone with 25 years experience of IT doesn't understand the measures, how can you expect the business people? So information is often presented in the wrong way. I was actually doing some work with a different customer than KPN this morning, and one of them told me a little story. He'd been involved in a company that had a measurements program going for 7 years, and they had a review, and most of the people involved in the program didn't understand the measures, and they were measuring things like, CMMI level, how many people are doing this, how many people are doing that, lots of secondary measures. And someone asked the question, well, how much better have we got in 7 years? And there was no answer from the measurement department. So KPN are not alone in struggling to get measurement underway and get KPIs. And that story is not from KPN, that's from a different company, which I won't name. But you end up with this situation, there's lots of measures, but there's no benchmarks and there's no targets. There's no definition of success, and that means people aren't motivated to use measures. One of the things I've learned is measures without any kind of target, okay, it tells us where we are, but it's not changing, it's not helping us change anything. And it becomes very sporadic and inconsistent in those cases. So what happens is measurement gets seen as an overhead rather than an enabler. And what we've managed to achieve at KPN is a complete turnaround of that. So measurement is now at the heart of almost everything they're doing, certainly within ITNL and setting targets and objectives. I would like to stress that this is not an uncommon situation. As I alluded to with that second story, most metrics initiatives are seen like this. They're seen as producing graphs and papers and dashboards that no one is looking at, no one's using, no one's interpreting, and that don't really relate to the organisational goals. And this is what was causing us a real problem. How are we going to demonstrate that adopting a more agile and iterative way of working was actually objectively an improvement on what had been done before? So what did we do? Well, the first thing we had to do when we got involved was actually what we called here, go back to the future. Try and focus on those organisational goals. And, being a little bit selfish, focus on what were the real goals of the Software Development Competency Centre and the change programme that we were involved in. Let's try and create some credible measures that would help us at least communicate to the business the effect we were having, if not allow the whole of the business to get on board with the same aspirations and targets. So what did we do to go about this? Well, the first thing we looked at was, let's take a step back and think about how we can measure. Those of you who were on the previous webinar, there's one that complements this sort of case study story with more of a theoretical basis and what kind of measures you can measure. And this slide is repeated from there. But you need to have measures that everyone can understand, not complex derived measures, not sort of performance indexes that no one knows what it really means. Is 17 good or bad? Oh, well, nobody knows. Things that are the effect of what you're doing, not the causes. Within the Software Development Competency Centre, we measure lots of things. We measure how many people have been trained. We have a certification program. We measure how many practitioners and master practitioners there are. We measure the adoption of the practices in the Essential Unified Process that are being rolled out. This is all very useful for us, but it doesn't mean anything to the business, because the answer from the business perspective is always, so what? Okay, everyone's doing use cases now. So what? What difference have you made? Let's look at the effects, find those primary rather than the secondary measures. And also, we're looking at things that take time to bed in. So what's the performance over a year, not a week or a month? Quarterly, 6 monthly, those are good things. But we need to get a good baseline, and we need to understand the seasonal fluctuations so that we can actually tell how we're doing on a month-by-month basis. We need to make sure that we're not just measuring the new stuff. We need measures that are independent of the way of working, so that as we change and improve, we can continue to harvest that evidence that things are getting better. And one of the important things we've done is focusing on this happier area, better, faster, cheaper and happier. Don't forget how people feel. Make sure that you have happy customers, you have happy sponsors, happy users, and it's important that the employees within the IT department are happy as well. So gather some of that stuff alongside the quantitative data, because those allow us to see through any gaming or tricks that people are playing by, oh, we're measuring how volatile the requirements are, so we'll ban change. Not a good thing to do. That will not give you happy customers. So you need to get that balance and make sure these measures are practical with a focus on the real goals of the business. Again, I was talking with a different customer today, and we're just going through this. And very quickly we came up with a candidate scorecard for them, because what they'd been measuring was all the secondary stuff. How agile are we, they were measuring. Who cares how agile you are? What results are you getting? Look at the effects, not the causes. And then you will have some evidence that agility is better and that more agile is better, etc. So make sure we get that practical stuff in there. And that was the first thing we did. The second thing was we revisited the goals. We actually started by taking a look at balanced scorecard, because that's a business thing. If you're not familiar with balanced scorecard, it splits things into 4 areas. Financial, to succeed financially, how should we appear to our stakeholders? Customer, to achieve our vision, how should we appear to our customers? And this is a great way of helping you get objectives and the questions that you want to answer. So we looked at all of those 4 quartiles, and we're getting quite a lot of questions. The ones highlighted in yellow were particularly important to the change program and the SDCC. But what we found was that the same measures would actually support objectives and help answer questions in all of those areas. So it didn't give us a very good framework for building a dashboard or for actually, looking at whether we had a balanced set of measures. One of the measures that I would recommend organisations do, and you must remember we're talking organisational measures here, not project measures, is requirements focus. Are we doing the most important things for the business? Well, that has a financial implication. It certainly has a customer implication. Achieving that has a process and a learning and growth implication. So the same measures would support objectives and questions in those different areas. And the other thing we found was that the use of balanced scorecard and that sort of like financial customer learning and growth process again led to that kind of so what question from people. Yeah, obviously we have to do well financially, but we're the IT department. What does that mean? It's not aspirational. It doesn't have the goals built in. So the situation we found ourselves in was this was a good aid to finding the questions, but the same measures recurred in all the areas, and we weren't getting any traction. We were getting, again, it wasn't becoming anything that actually inspired people. So we then took this step back and said, what are the underlying goals? Now, we'd already been working on this measurement framework, so I had a lot of stuff to bring into the thing here. But when we talk about agility, we talk about organisational change, you talk to the business, what they're looking for is better software. They're looking for faster, so reduced time to market. They're looking for cheaper, more bang for the buck, more value for money. And they're looking for happier stakeholders, sponsors, customers, and employees. And this is something that resonates. It's aspirational. It gets people lined up. Yeah, we want to be better. People don't go, we want to be financial. We want to be process. It's much more engaging and brings people together. And we also find that the individual measures only live in one of these quartiles. So it allows us to get the measures balanced, because the fear people always have is if we could get better at the expense of becoming slower. we could get better but with increased costs. So you need a balance between these areas. We could get faster and cheaper, but we could alienate our customers and stakeholders. So this is much more close to the organizational, the underlying goals for the kind of change program. Again, we must remember we're looking at organizational measures for software development organizations. And this fits very well. So based on that framework, we started to organize. And the good thing is it works for all the projects. You don't have to be an agile or an iterative project to want to be better and faster and cheaper and have happy customers. It puts the goals front and center. And the most important thing that we've learned is that this kind of thing makes the measurement not just something you're doing and that's like a policeman, that's a punitive. It makes it aspirational and inspirational. Yep, this year we're going to get better. How are we going to get better? In which areas are we going to get better? This year we're going to get faster. And like I said, it allows us to have balanced measures in the different areas and relate them to our goals for the year and address our particular issues. So it's not a static framework where we say these are the measures you will measure for all time. We're looking for things that relate to the goals. It's all related to goal, question, metric, but rather than, hey, here's a measurement, I wonder what question it would answer, I wonder what the goal should be, putting the goals front and forward. So we had agreed on the framework. So we very quickly put together an initial dashboard proposal. So this is the initial proposal. The numbers on here are not real. We haven't started measuring stuff. We were just doing some testing to see if we had measures that people could understand and that people could relate to. To do that, we took quite a few standard measures from our sort of IGI measurement catalogue, but we tailored them for the organisation. So in terms of predictability, hitting your release dates, they have a milestone called decision to go public, DP. That's the one we're interested in. The idea of escape defects as a quality measure, meeting business needs. They'd already made a large investment in function points. They weren't getting any traction, but there was a goal to reduce the cost per function point. So again, we can bring those measures into the framework. There's a lot of focus on CapEx and OpEx and capitalizing money because that's more tax efficient and a better use of money. In terms of faster, the two areas that were causing the most problem, one was the time of the decision making. Between a business idea coming in and the decision to pursue it, how long is that and can we reduce that? And another one was time to production. So based around this, we put together this scorecard and started to, we looked at it and thought this would really give us the evidence we need within the Software Development Competency Centre. But we took it out then to the stakeholders to see if they could understand it. And we did a presentation to a guy who's actually the incoming CIO of ITNL. And we did a sort of kind of slides we just looked at, and he's sort of looking a bit dull. We've got out a sheet of A3 with this one, put it in front of him, and suddenly he's engaged. He's looking at the measures, he's understanding them, and he starts to ask questions. Okay, so if I'm improving quality, wouldn't that have an effect? Right, so we would keep an eye on the cost per function point, make sure that's going in the right direction, and make sure that we've got the, happy business sponsors and happy customers. And you could see it started interesting discussions. You'll notice there's also some dials on there. What we want to do is we want to have trends and targets for the measures, the things we're trying to improve. Where things are at an acceptable behavior, we want to have a tolerance and an alarm. The trend isn't very interesting. We are going to be compliant. A lot of people with Sarbanes-Oxley and GRIP and things like that going on. You need to be over a certain, your projects need to be compliant, even 100% compliancy. So a dial is much more a better way of looking and getting those alarms built in. The numbers shown on here are all just random, but they illustrate the idea of the kind of things that we could look at. We're not interested in the trend, but we want to make sure that we don't degrade that performance. So what was the response to this initial dashboard? There were certain questions came up. The first one is, why are there so many measures? But where when you present measures people can understand, they start moving around. They want to know what's the impact. So if I improve hitting my release dates, is it just by giving all the products more time? We can look at time to production. Some people find the idea of the better, faster, cheaper, happier. They think that's a little bit informal. But we had an interesting conversation. One of the guys promoting this really bought into it, and someone else raised this issue. And he said, if I was presenting to the IEEE or writing an academic paper, I might go for something more formal. If I want to get traction within my organization, if I want to get the business excited, if I want everyone to understand it, this is something they're going to understand, they can all relate to, and they all have aspirations to be better, faster, cheaper, and have happier sponsors, happier customers, and be happier themselves. So this idea of making the whole measurement program inspirational is incredibly powerful. The other question is, a lot of people seem to think there is just one or two or three measures of IT goodness, the one true measure, the one measure to roll them all. If we multiply milestone achievement by the length of the project, divide by the number of defects, we can have an IT productivity index or something. Nobody understands them. Not only that, they don't trigger any questions or reductions. This year it's the same as last year, okay, but why? When you set targets, no one knows how to achieve the target because there's so many things getting multiplied together. You need a balance, and you need stuff in my experience, in all four of these areas to have a credible set of goals and objectives. So this was put forward, and what we found was people started to get quite excited. They could immediately relate to it. They could understand the measures. They could tell which way they should be trending. They could also look at, if you had real measures filled in, they could say, well, this year, why don't we get 10% faster? Why don't we get set a level of 80% milestones here? So it informed and started a discussion about what we're really trying to achieve. It's independent of how we're doing it. There's nothing here CMMI level. There's no how agile are we. This is all stuff that the business understand, really related to what we're trying to achieve. And the balance allows us to encourage the improvements while sustaining the success. And I mean, I've seen a lot of measurement presentations, I've presented a lot. This is something that really relates to people. People get inspired by it. And that's what you'll see in the rest of the story here from KPN. So we had a straw man. What do we do now? Well, that's okay. It's very easy to take a set of measures that somebody's recommended and show that they're doing, but there's more to that. You need to tune, and you're going to need baselines. You've got to make sure the measures are practical. So to get started, we got into tuning and baselines. So the measures must be feasible and cost effective. There needs to be historical data. Do we have a 2008, 2009 baseline? Is the data already being collected? And if it is, where and can it be trusted? When we look at each measure, there has to be a business case for each measure. How much will it cost to collect and maintain? One of the measures that that KPN uses is function points. That's something where you have to employ specialist people. Over half the cost of the metrics desk is just doing function point analysis and function point counting. That's a big argument. Other measures like milestones, whether they're hitting the milestone, financial measures, the information is often already available. You have to do a bit of mining, you might have to do some data cleansing, but there's stuff there that you can make use of. And you want your dashboard to be a living thing that reflects the changing goals of the organization. So we're not looking for every measure. Let's just find a few that are our focus for this period, this 6 months or this year, the areas requiring major improvement. Make sure we have the alarms and meters, that we don't degrade the things we're already good at. And as we go forward, that will change from being a trend that we're tracking to just a level of performance that we're monitoring. And we've got to make sure the measures must be practical and cost effective. As we started to tune the dashboard, we actually found that some of the measures we'd like to do were just economically unfeasible. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through. So we had our candidate. So did we spend time worrying that we didn't have everything? Well, no, we believe firmly in iterative and incremental development of everything. Let's get started. So we picked 4 measures, actually there was 5, there's some function point stuff going on as well, to get started. We had one in each area. We thought the first thing we need to get better at is predictability. Are projects delivering their releases on time? We could talk a lot about faster delivery. Are projects delivering more frequently? How long is it taking to make decisions? We did have a debate about maybe we should just reduce how late they are. But from a business perspective, less late is still late. And you could lose, a week late could actually destroy all the business value, allow the competition to establish the market. Until you've got predictability, you can't really do that much about, reducing the speed, the time taken. We looked around and we could look at how happy the sponsors were. They were actually already, the CFO was already doing a survey about how the business leaders saw ITNL and how they were satisfied. I've taken all the scales off, so these are snippets and bits of real graphs, but unfortunately we can't share with you the real performance. It's a little bit business sensitive. And on average, what's the average cost of the project? So we started to demonstrate and prove that we could produce these measures and see how much they were going to cost. We also had some work going on the function points. But with the function points, the problem is creating a baseline. What was happening is that function point counts were being done for every project. If you're familiar with function points, you know that you do an estimate at the beginning and then you do a count at the end. So if you just start doing the new projects and your average project length is 6 to 9 months, it's going to take you probably 18 months to actually create a baseline for a year. Now that's a long time to wait, because without the baseline you can't set the targets, and without the baseline you can't show evidence. But by demonstrating how the measures work, we actually managed to go back and create that baseline, and we'll talk a bit more about baselining as we go forward. So we needed some real measures to bring things to life, and at this point we're still working within the Software Development Competency Centre. So we're looking at things that will provide evidence that we are making real improvements and primary measures. We couldn't wait for everyone else to get their act together for KPIs and things like that, because that was just stalled at the time. So we got the real measures. An interesting thing is the relationship between how you create a baseline. So it's interesting to have a year's data to see signatures. In this measure here, you can see that August we dropped to 0. That doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. It might mean everyone's gone on holiday, so there are, nothing happening going on here. We can also do the moving averages. I like to have at least, performance for the year, for the 6 months, for the quarter. Monthly performance is too changeable, because within any quarter you've probably got a couple of good months and a bad month. We need to get that historical data. If the data's not there, we can do some data mining. We can do some, there's many ways we can establish baselines, many of which are cost effective. For the function point baseline, rather than measure every project for a year, we built the business case to go back and actually do some function point counting on a sample of old projects. That allows us to get that baseline. No longer 18 months before we got a usable baseline. That's something we can do in a couple of months elapsed time. So we can move forward on that. Once we've got the baseline, we've now got a 2009 baseline. That's something we can show. And one of the things we've taken to doing within KPN is to have the first row be the baseline and look at the year. Because based on that, we're going to set some targets. Okay? So in this case, we seem to be hitting 56%, and we can set a target to be 65%. Our target could be a percentage improvement or an absolute value. But because we've got the baseline, we can easily set targets now. And then we can start tracking our performance. And we can look at, if the year ended now, where would we be? So we can do year to date, either just from the months or from using historical data for a year, extrapolating from our baseline. So now we've not just got the measures, we've got them in a framework, but with targets. And the targets really help to make the measures relevant to people. And the important thing is, before we can do that, we need some kind of baseline to enable measurable improvements and target setting. Otherwise, it all becomes incredibly subjective, doesn't it? Hands up who thinks we're better this year. 9 out of 10 cats think we've improved. That's useful, but after a while people want some objective more quantifiable evidence. So we started to look at these, and this, and I know this is blurred, and that's quite deliberate, and the targets have been obscured, but this is actually from the real proposal to the management team of ITNL. And what was put forward was to look at better predictability, milestone, this decision to go public hit, release dates. Better quality, the number of escape defects. And escape defects is one of my personal favourite measures. It's where we actually measure how many defects there are live. We weight them so we get a single line, and it gives us a very powerful measure. We also wanted to make sure that the number of priority 1 incidents was under control and that the compliancy was hitting its target. And we proposed some dials for that. So 4 things in the area of better. In terms of faster, so the things interesting was decision making. In a lot of organisations, someone has an idea. The organisation I was talking to today, if you put in a significant change request into one of their programs, it can be 9 months before you get an answer. That's not very good, because by then probably the business opportunity has passed. So faster decision making. We can measure it and we can set targets. Faster production. So in terms of becoming more agile, we don't want 2-year projects. They're not helping anybody. We want a quicker turnaround. We want, you know, things available in internet speed. So we can start to measure that one. In the cheaper area, because we're using the function points, we can look at euro per function point once we've created our baseline. But also the use of money. Projects within budget, particularly within their CapEx budget. That's something that's very important here and is well motivated within KPN. So we could look at that and look at the targets for that. And we could finally balance that off with how happy are our customers. And by customers here, we're talking about the people actually interacting with the ITNL projects on the business side, and happier employees. That's quite important. So that was the proposal that was put forward, and that met with approval, and led to people starting to think much more about what targets can we set. And that's when we really started to get traction. We took the measurements we were doing for the SDCC out to the whole of ITNL. And this slide actually shows the latest dashboard that's been produced. This is a dashboard that's been produced every month this year. You can see the red lines indicate targets. Again, I've had to hide the real data, but this should give you some confidence this is actually being done. They're doing measuring the milestone, DP hit, compliancy, escape defects. We are still pulling together the baseline for that, but that's going to kick in the second quarter, and there'll be targets for the year. Priority 1 incidents is being measured. In the cheaper area, we've got the budget achievement with the CapEx we talked about, and we by the end of this quarter we'll have the function point baselines to do the euro per function point. In terms of faster, it's all about the decision making between their idea to opportunity milestone and the decision to fund the project, and the time to production. And again, there are targets for people to improve that, and stakeholder and project satisfaction. Now that's the ITNL dashboard. We're looking at the whole organisation. Remember, that was 14 programs, hundreds of projects, thousands of people impacted by that. But this is what the business is. This is all stuff the business can understand and relate to. Everyone's talking about better, faster, cheaper and happier, from the developers through the management out into the business sponsors and representatives. It took a while to decide on the right set of measures. You need to get things in the right order. As I said earlier, less late is still late. So hit your release dates first, then we can start pulling things in. Be within budget, and then we can talk about, it's not that useful for business to know that our cost overruns have gone from X to Y if we're still over budget, because the cost of money is significant for organisations. The inability to know where your finances are going to be. In terms of the measures, we had the 4 we started with. We went up to 10. At one point, there were 24 being considered, but that's just too many when we're starting out. So we ended up with that scorecard with 9. It's got the balance, and we found it's enabling targets and helping us, make sure no gaming is going on, and answer the kind of questions that people are asking about how we're improving. And what you find is by having the right measures, you start to drive the right behaviour. And this is the the most exciting thing about what's been done here is how measurement has actually seen to be now as an enabler, and everyone's talking about measurement within the organization. So, what are we doing? We have the ITNL dashboard that we saw earlier, but there's also one for each. Remember, there's 14 programs. Each program has its own dashboard using the same measures. Each program has individual targets based on their previous performance, based on the baselines. We can slice and dice this from via the organizational units. We can also look at, the impact of new practices. We can slice and dice it by people using process. You can't really look at individual projects with better, faster, cheaper, happier, because those are implicit in their objectives and settings. So projects are measured differently. And if you're interested in measures for iterative and agile projects, we've got the final webinar in this series is going to look at an iterative dashboard where we see burn down charts and risk exposure. But a lot of those project measures just don't roll up. The risk exposure of ITNL is not the sum of the program risk exposures, and the program risk exposure is not the sum of the project risk exposures. They need to be looked at individually. They're useful measures, but if you look at the risk exposure of ITNL at any time, assuming a normal distribution of projects and a normal distribution of risk, it's going to be the same, because as we finish one thing and close off, we start something else. So the measures we're using at the program level and ITNL are things that trend well and meet with our objectives in terms of our performance in that better, faster, cheaper, happier. So, and people are using this as we'll see. So, what's happened? What's the end result here? We're still waiting. It's going to take us a while to get the evidence that things are better, faster, cheaper, happier. But even within the first 3 months, there is evidence that certain practices and ways of working are showing benefit, that certain kind of projects are hitting their DP milestones. Some programs are performing better than others. This has actually turned the metrics desk from being seen as an overhead, a set of people sitting in a little corner, to an integral part of the business. Literally everybody within ITNL and within their immediate business partners is talking about better, faster, cheaper, happier. You hear people talking about this every day. The senior managers talk about it. The metrics desk is now interacting at a very senior level. Hans, who was going to be with us today, his profile is so high now that he got trumped for this webinar to go and do some stuff with the the head of ITNL. So very much more visibility. It's no longer seen as an overhead. It's visible. The measures are no longer just for internal use. Everyone's looking to see if ITNL is going to be better, faster, cheaper, happier this year. And it's actually built into the bonuses and reward schemes for the programs, for the competency center managers, and for the individuals. The measures are driving targets and bonuses, and this is when you really get traction. People want to meet their targets. They want to be measured now because they want to prove their success. The measurement has become inspirational. This year our program is going to get better by these improvements, and the improvements are defined in a way that's independent of whether they do waterfall or iterative, independent of how they do their requirements process, independent of the technology they use. But everyone can have targets in each of those areas. And if everyone hits their targets, ITNL will go way beyond the targets that they've been set. So the thing that's made us get this traction, so we started with something isolated within the SDCC. It's now become an important key role of everything that's done within ITNL. And it's all about targets, targets, targets. Measures without targets they can be interesting, but they're not driving behavior, and they tend to get used too late. Oh, look, no wonder you failed. Your risk exposure was too high, for example. So what's happened with this is having smart measures, intuitive measures, leads to smart and intuitive targets. Target setting should not be guessing. All right? There are certain steps to target setting. First of all, you need to know where you are. This is why the baselines are so important. So few IT organizations actually know where they are in terms of their effectiveness. They might know where they are in terms of their agility or the process they use, but those are secondary measures. Are they competitive? Have they got happy customers? Are they delivering value for money? Are they generating business value? These are the real questions. With the baseline, we can then define what we want to achieve. Okay, and those targets help us with everything from budget setting, bonuses, set targets for the year or for 6 months, validate and agree, make sure people buy into them, because they're not just buying into that, they're buying into the whole measurement scheme as well as they agree their targets for the year. And it's very simple, because with this framework we just have to ask how much better, faster, cheaper, happier do you want to be, or are you going to be? And having an intuitive, inspirational framework leads to intuitive measures. And that's really when we started to get the traction. So we talk a lot, people talk a lot about SMART targets, specific. Do your targets say exactly what you need to do? Well, we've now got measures that everyone understands, that everyone's signing up for, and the targets give us a percentage increase or an absolute value within that area that we have to hit. They are all measured. We will have the proof that we've achieved those targets. We need to make sure that they're achievable in the time allowed and that they're realistic, and by using the half year or year we've time bound them. So we naturally get SMART targets. Programs and individuals have been incentivized to hit those targets. The measures, having the measurements available and measures that the management bought into, made it much easier for the management to do the objectives. They cut the time they spent setting the objectives for programs considerably, because they actually had baselines and measures. They weren't guessing, they actually had something realistic. Targets have been set in each of the better, faster, cheaper, happier areas. We're tracking the trends, and we have some alarms to make sure we're maintaining quality and avoid gaming. And when you take it all down, it all boils down to this kind of statement that we've got here. People talk about this. In 2010, ITNL will become better by hitting our release dates, milestone achievement with increased quality and predictability. We will become faster by improving delivery time, shorter time to market. We will become cheaper by getting our budgets under control and decreasing the price per function point, and we'll be happier with an improvement of customer and employee satisfaction. These are motivational statements. This is setting the agenda for improvements across the whole of the IT department in a way that's accessible to people. And this is evidenced in some of the things that are being done within the organization. On the left-hand side here is a poster that went up in every building within KPN, within ITNL. Performance and innovation, are you a real IT champion? The guy there is the famous Dutch speed skater. This was around the time of the Winter Olympics that this came out. And everyone's talking about how they're going to become better, faster, cheaper, happier. And everyone's bought into this and is related to this. This has become part of the mission of ITNL. And it's come from, driven by the measurements that are being put in place. It's even made it, on the right-hand side, is a sanitized extract from a supplier proposal. The suppliers are now talking about how they're going to help their partners in ITNL to become better, faster, cheaper, and happier. It's the first time I've seen suppliers really getting behind the goals of the organisation they're supporting rather than their own. And this is percolated all the way down, and we're actually seeing the suppliers are now talking about, you go with us, this is how we're going to help you get better, this is how much. And you can see that there were targets down there, down at the supplier level, in the same, because these are organisational measures, we can ripple them all the way down. They don't apply to a single project, but when you're engaging a supplier for the year or with a whole master contract, this stuff is starting to buy at the supplier level, which is fantastic. So that's the basic story so far. Even sort of, this has taken, in terms of elapsed time, I got involved in the SDCC in about September. The measures had gone from the SDCC out into the management team and part of the targets by the end of the year. And now, the measures exist for 7 out of 9 of those in the first quarter, and the others will be coming along by the half year. And this is something that will last, because next year we can get even better, even faster, even cheaper, even happier. We may have other areas of motivation, but by making it inspirational has been incredibly effective. And because this is now successful, people are asking for new measures. One that would be key to the success of ITNL is reducing the total cost of ownership. And it's been identified we can look at the cost of aftercare. and those financial numbers are already there. So that's one that could get introduced. We've always had problems in the area of requirements, as a lot of organisations do, and now we're going to be looking at some measures of requirements quality. We couldn't introduce them earlier because the requirement space was such a, every domain was doing requirements in a different area. There was no trustworthy data. So we've had to do some work to improve the quality of requirements before it makes sense to measure. But on the back of that, we're going to start to see some measures of requirements focus, requirements volatility, and other requirements-related measures coming in. And over time, we would expect the set of measures, how we see getting better, faster, cheaper, and happier is something that, again, will change over time. We can keep our eye on the alerts and the speedometers, but in terms of driving change, we're going to trend and analyze certain measures and focus. And we're just getting started, and we've had great success in the first quarter. I'm really looking forward to the end of the year because we will actually be able to prove whether or not the move to iterative and adopt an agile working in such a highly large-scale, outsourced, distributed environment, we will have proof that it's better. We're already starting to collect that proof. We've had one iterative project that came in. It was something like €900,000 project. It came in for something like 500,000 or 600,000 euros. A saving on a single project of 300,000 to 400,000 euros. That pays for a lot of measurement and a lot of mentoring, and that is a saving that would never have happened in a waterfall project, because one thing waterfall projects do is they spend all the money. Okay, now we've just got the testing left to do. You're not going to finish. You're not going to have those significant savings. So we're just getting started on the journey, but and I know I've said it a few times, and when Inga joined in at the end of the previous call, the effect it's had of what people are talking about, the inspiration and the goals has been phenomenal. The whole organization is talking about better, faster, cheaper, happier in a way that they've never talked about, process changes and improvements before. So, okay, so that's the end of the story. We'll happily take some questions now. The main message we really want to put across is that better, faster, cheaper, happier really does work, helps you get to intuitive measures, sensible targets. Okay, so I think we hand back to Leanne now.
Thank you very much, Ian. We actually have received quite a few questions while you were presenting. So I'm going to leave this screen up and people can see it so I can get right into the questions. People can read what's on the screen. So the first question, Ian, is how important are function points to measuring success, and are they only unit of work used as the basis for cost, speed measures, or are there other approaches?
There are lots of other approaches. Function points is something that they had already bought to the idea and had already invested in. So it gave us a way of measuring productivity. I was talking to another organization today, and we were looking at we had a couple of hours workshop, and if I just find the piece of paper where I wrote my notes, in terms of cheaper there, where they're not doing function points, and they don't really believe in them. They do use cases, but not on every project, so that becomes practice specific, so use case points wouldn't work. They're heavily agile, but as you'll know if you've tried doing story points, there's no absolute measure. So in terms of cheaper, budget achievement, average project cost, value for money, which is a more qualitative one, and total cost of ownership are some target measures for cheaper area just to get started. If we can reduce the total cost of ownership, we can show significant savings. One of the problems with measuring innovation projects is, yeah, we can deliver faster by just leaving all the defects for the maintenance guys to fix, and things like that. So there are other things. Function points, if you've got the infrastructure and you've bought into it, that's something you can leverage. But there are other ways. By just finding out what the goal is, what people think cheaper would mean, we can come up with some measures that people can understand. We can look at, the average project cost over a year on year is an indication that the cost of projects is getting cheaper. We can look at at how much is being delivered in the better area. We can look at the speed, you know. But if all the projects are getting smaller and we're delivering faster, that's great. You know, we're probably getting more bang for the buck. So there's other things. We need to find the goals and the right triggers. So there are other measures. Things like function points are very expensive measures. So you've always got to look at the business case and the economics for those things. So we tend to try and find other ways of doing cheaper by looking at, you know, the distribution of the money, how many releases we've done, and how big they were, and things like that. So you can look at the, you know, the cost of the software you're producing. But you know, we don't really want to be counting lines of code and things like that, because we want to be looking at the value and the costs of what we've been doing. So I hope that answers that question.
Thank you, Ian. Second question, is it also important to compare targets with external benchmarks to ratify the levels set?
Benchmarking and comparing with your competitors can be a useful thing, but most of the benchmarks will typically be proprietary and often secondary measures as well. So those are useful, but what we want to do is we want our organisation to get better, faster, cheaper, happier. Even if we're the best organisation, we still want to get better, faster, cheaper, happier. We want our customers to be happy. And so the benchmarks will often have a few measures, but they won't actually tell you how well perceived that IT organisation is and things like that. It's an important thing, but a lot of those, again, have, I mean, KPN have done some benchmarking via McKinsey, who can compare their performance against other IT organisations, and that's something that they look at. You know, they want to be an A player, but to be an A player, they've got to be better, faster, cheaper, and happier. So you can compare things like media, how much do you spend, and your market share, and those things on benchmarks. So useful things to have, but again, often they're counterintuitive, and here we're looking for things that are really based around our own goals. These are, remember, these are measures for the IT organisation, not the organisation. If we're looking at KPN, they have a different set of KPIs and things like that. Again, so I hope that answers that one.
Okay, thank you. Next question, what was the measurement catalog you referred to?
Right. This is the second of a series of webcasts. The first one is available for download and listening to on our website, the RJI website. So up on the slide that Leanne's got up at the moment. And in there it talks in detail. So what I've done is collected over time a set of useful intuitive measures. I haven't got, or RJI, we haven't got the 7 things you ought to measure because it's related to your goals. Some of them will be easy for you. You'll have the data. They'll be cost effective. Others would be foolish. You know, we're not going to say you must do function points. What does cheaper mean to you? And we have a selection of these. So there's a number of these that can help you very quickly put together a prototype dashboard. You tune the vocabulary, and then we start looking at whether they're cost effective. It's also not a finite set. So as we engage with more customers, we're collecting and looking for you know, additional measures to roll in. As I said before, a lot of the measures that are promoted within the industry are counterintuitive and very academic. Many of them have never actually been measured by people at all. And so what I'm doing is, what IGI are doing is collecting useful measures so that you can kickstart your program. And like I say, within a workshop today, we've come up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 candidate measures, all of which have been used before, which they're now going to go away and see how they relate to the business objectives and goals. And we're going to create a dashboard with some real measures, not actual data, but the actual graphs and things we'd use to find out if they communicate and resonate with people. And what will happen is they'll look at them and say, if this is happening, we're concerned about this, which will trigger new ones. So if you want to know more about the overall approach and the measurement catalogue, I'd recommend listening to the first webcast, where there's discussions of measures, how they evolve, and you know, more sort of generic example measures for you to take a look at.
Thank you, Ian. Last question, and we are slightly over the time. How do you establish a standard function point which applies across all projects?
Okay, so there's another question on function points. As I said, I'm personally not a huge fan of function points. Function points is a standard unit, and there are qualified function point analysts. And what function point analysts can do is, given a set of requirements, they initially can estimate how many function points this application would be, and that enables you to set, get an idea of how much it's going to cost. And they have different, there's QSM, and they have loads of information. They've done function point counting on lots of different people. And then when the project ends, you go back in and you actually count the function points. You look at the software that's been produced, and they look at the different kinds of transactions and operations and the complexity of stuff, and they come up with a function point count. Function points are something you can only do on the entire application. They're not something that you can attribute to individual use cases, because use cases and user stories will often use the same functions. So if you had two use cases that together were 200 function points, whichever one you do first may be 120 of them, and whichever one you do second may be 80. So you can't use them for velocity. They're not good for iterative projects, but they give you a coarse-grained way of looking at the mass of software that has been produced, and then you can do its cost. So the function point unit is defined. Another unit, if everyone was doing use cases, you can do use case points. But again, there has to be something you're really keen on. My personal preference is to find out, how people perceive value for money, what they're looking for in terms of, what cheaper would mean to your business. What does it mean? Because people don't really care how much lines of code. So what you often end up doing is stuff based around, the number of requirements and the scope of requirements that have been delivered. You can even start tracking real business value, but then you have to be able to do measurements out in the business itself, not just within the IT department. So I would certainly, the framework is very effective. KPN have chosen to use function points, but you can benefit and you can measure, value for money, how you're perceived in terms of your costs in lots of other ways, including budget achievement, value for money, average project costs, and average costs for a change request. So you can do lots of good things with percentages and normalization across the piece. But function points is one of the units. Some people are fans, others are not so keen, but it does give you a measurement, and you can then track how you're doing, and it takes into account different technologies and things like that. So you use them for estimating at the beginning and then counting at the end. This is why we can retrospectively create a baseline by going and counting the function points and comparing to the cost of, typical projects, different kinds of projects, different technologies. Okay, so I hope that answers that one.
Thank you, Ian. And so that's it for today. I just wanted to mention, as our Q&A time wasn't that long today, so if you have a question after this event, please feel free to direct them to Ian or to me. The email address is listed here. And of course, there's a lot of other resources available off of our website if you wanted to do a bit more research. And as I mentioned, on the previous slide we had shown, our next webcast is set for June 29th, where Ian will get into more detail on building an iterative dashboard. So that's all the time we have for today. We thank you all for attending, and the recording will be made available tomorrow. Thank you very much, Ian, for your time.
I'll just say that the recording is going to be the one with the customer questions as well.
Yes.
So that could be interesting. You might want to skip over me and just listen to what Inga, the manager of the Software Development Competency Centre, had to say about her experiences and then internally. That's sort of 10-15 minutes that would be a useful adjunct to what we've looked at today. So let's fast forward over my bit and listen to the customer answering questions at the end, if you're interested.
Thanks, Ian.
Okay. And thank you all for coming.
Bye.